Welcome to the Design YouTube channel. I'm Hugh, and today's video is part of a webinar series. Get ready for an engaging session ahead that will probably give you a lot of new information. Thank you, and hope you'll enjoy the video. So first of all, welcome everyone to the webinar. Thank you for coming here for the simple way of storytelling, and we're going to talk mainly about 3 ways to be effective as a storyteller. But again, in this part of the storytelling journey, we'll go through like different chapters. You'll actually notice that these chapters are actually developed to get you guys up to speed in a short, let's say, notice to like the latest things related to storytelling, what we know historically a bit and what we are applying today, and things related to tropes and so on and so forth. So it's going to be quite an interesting, extensive discussion. So we have here the chapters and table of contents. Okay, we got an intro to storytelling. We have a history of storytelling, maybe we'll call the brief history of storytelling. We have different types of storytelling, and we're going to go through different types. We're going to talk about these 3 main storytelling types. We're going to talk about the monomyth, the mountain, and nested loops. Okay, and of course you guys probably know about the monomyth, probably don't know about the mountain, or probably don't know about nested loops, but we'll go through them. Some do's and don'ts in storytelling, and of course some visual examples and closing thoughts about storytelling as well. Now, let's go towards the intro to storytelling here. Now, what you have to understand is that storytelling is the act of sharing stories to entertain, educate, preserve culture, and teach values. It uses words, images, and sounds to convey message, evoke emotions, and connect with the audience in a profound way. So what you have to get out about this simple statement is basically to share stories. And it's also a very important component of humanity, I would say, as a whole, because we are basically entangled in this idea of storytelling with each other. We tell stories all the time. We have events that shape our lives and our certain types of experiences that occur. And all these things that I'm talking about are crucial components about what happens in visual storytelling as well. Now, you have verbal storytelling, which has an oral tradition. So verbal storytelling is one of the most oldest forms in human communication, passed down through generations. Okay, you got spontaneity. It often involves improvisation and it can be adapted in the spot based on audience reactions. So you get these type of scenarios, for example, in podcasts. You'll probably see a lot of this component of spontaneity coming out. You have the performance component, which will include elements of theatrics such as voice modulation, gestures, and expressions. And you do see things related to performance in different types of performances. You have interaction, which allows for direct interaction between storyteller and the audience. And this happens on a daily basis with you guys in Discord. If you hang out together and you talk about something, that's basically storytelling, and it's based on interaction. And of course, that's a memory-based as well, which relies on the storyteller's memory and skill to recall and convey the story accurately. And these are some of the things related to verbal storytelling. Now, when it comes to written form of storytelling, you have things such as providing the permanent record of the story, which can be revisited and analyzed over time. And of course, like this can be like historical storytelling, or it can be documented, for example, life of an artist. That can be a form of storytelling as well, explaining or telling stories about the artist's life. That can be actually very interesting, and you might be interested in reading that, and that is provided through documentation. And of course, there's structure, often that follows more rigid structure with clear grammar, punctuation, and syntax. These are form of storytelling that are used in official documents and so on and so forth, and sometimes legislative type of documentation. You have things related to detail, for example, allowing for intricate details and complex narratives that might be harder to convey orally. And usually that is like what happens with storytelling in a written form. You can access a lot of details there and add them to convey the proper message. Accessibility, that can reach a broader audience through books, articles, and digital media. And of course, we know about this accessibilities all around us. From Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and so on, so social media, we have that accessibility. There's the editing that can be revised and polished before reaching the audience, ensuring clarity and coherence, is oftentimes what happens with even this presentation here. I edited this whole thing for you guys to actually get a good understanding of what's going on. Now, visual storytelling is the use of images, graphics, and visual media to convey narrative or message towards an audience. So that is the definition of visual storytelling. Now, visual storytelling has to communicate clearly. and this is a very important, the message has to be clear. Visual storytelling can use compositional elements, different framing and formats to emphasize certain things. Visual storytelling uses props and various elements that can include weathering, textures, and even design that informs about the world itself or even a character. Now let's go into the history of storytelling. When it comes to the history of storytelling, we're going to go through like eras basically, so we can actually have a comprehension about the areas and when it happened, why it happened. So we have the prehistoric era, where early humans used storytelling through cave paintings and oral tales to share experiences, myths, and survival tips. Okay, and in this part of the storytelling set, right? If you think about like prehistory, we have all these cave paintings that are interesting, and people actually convey the messaging to the next generation that was seeing those paintings to understand certain things that happen with these type of animals, or certain type of action, or a certain type of like experience that they went through. And then after the prehistoric era, we go towards the ancient civilization. And we have cultures like Egyptians, Greeks, Sumerians developed written storytelling through hieroglyphs, epic poems, the Iliad or the Epic of Gilgamesh, and cuneiform tablets. Okay. Then we go to the medieval period, where storytelling flourished in the form of religious texts, folklore, and ballads, with stories being passed down orally and through manuscripts. Okay, and of course here you'll have, guys, what you see on the screen are some visual examples of that type of storytelling that was depicted in that period of time. And as you can see, you have like images plus text and some images, and this still exists today. If you think about, like, this is so old, but it still is applied and exists today. Now, when it comes to the second part of the history of storytelling, we have the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, which revolutionized storytelling, making books widely accessible and fostering the spread of ideas. And this is a very important area, because this is how people shared stories really fast. Like, the propagation of information was way faster than it was before. Therefore, things are starting to develop even more. Therefore, people are starting to exchange ideas at this point. They're exchanging stories, and things are starting to be very, very different. And then we have the modern era, the 19th and 20th century, that saw the rise of novels, short stories, and new media such as film, radio, and television, broadening the scope and reach of storytelling. And of course, now we have a lot of this stuff today in the digital age, where the storytelling continues to evolve with digital platforms, social media, and interactive media, allowing for new forms of narrative expression and global sharing. So these are kind of the main things that happen in the history of storytelling. Now let's see some different types of storytelling to go into. So when we talk about types of storytelling, we actually refer to the various narrative structures, techniques, and genres used to convey stories. Each type represents a different approach to organizing and presenting a narrative tailored to achieve specific effects or to appeal to different audiences. And here we have some examples clearly. We have the Monomyth, which is the hero's journey, and you probably heard about this quite a couple of times. It's like there are a lot of movies out there that are based on the Monomyth or the hero's journey. The hero's journey is written by Joseph Campbell. You have the 3-act structure, which happens a lot in, let's say, shorts and a lot of animations. The Kisho Tenketsu basically comes from Japan as well. It's a sort of storytelling. Frame story, basically, which is you're telling stories with each frame, and the story develops with each frame. Like, it's an interesting area where you guys might want to look into, because there's not a predefined type of narrative. You basically build a narrative as you go. You have anthology, for example, which anthology, you guys know what it is. Non-linear narrative, epistolary. You got stream of consciousness, and you see a lot of this stream of consciousness in a lot of philosophy related storytelling types. You got the magical realism, the picaresque, and so on and so forth. Like, I'm not gonna go through everything, and some of them you probably know about: the myth, the fable, fairy tale, allegory, the dystopian, utopian types of stories. All of these are types of stories that actually surround us human beings on a daily basis. And of course, you will have a proclivity as a human being towards a certain type of story that you enjoy more than others as well. So this is interesting to actually go and at least read what each means. I do recommend that, guys, because we're not going to go through all of them. They're quite extensive on each part. But if you go read on each and one of them, you'll basically probably gain an insight that can definitely, I believe, help you to understand a bit more of what you enjoy in terms of storytelling and what you can actually do as an artist in that direction. Now let's see what it represents. So, diverse perspectives. Different storytelling shows how people see the world. You have cultural expression. They share tradition and beliefs across generations. And this is super important because it actually happens across Europe, for example, and in Asia as well. And of course, in the US, that, has a certain type of like cultural expression there that is going on as well. And of course, all these things will be a foundation to a lot of people and a lot of individuals around the world. Now you have narrative techniques, and these methods let storytellers try new ways to tell stories. And again, the narrative techniques are being used across social media as well. Like even companies and brands will have a narrative technique being used behind the brand to actually showcase usually like the truth. So that's kind of the currency you're actually going towards. Like if you want to be usually successful, I think on social media, I think the best coin to exchange for the audience is telling the audience the truth. And of course, when it comes to like the importance of it, you'll have engagement, where many storytelling styles keep people interested. You have understanding. They help explain complex ideas and experiences. You have empathy. Stories help us understand others' view. And of course, like this is super important, like the empathy part, because like that's how we get to know each other. And we tell stories about ourselves and we empathize with each other in order to actually gain more trust, build a bond with each other, and actually trust each other more to actually do something together, maybe hang out, maybe do something even more. And of course, you have creativity, which they encourage new ideas and ways to tell stories. And of course, you got connection, which storytelling will bring people together across cultures and time. And of course, this is important as well, because like sharing an experience of a certain area or listening to the stories that existed there, it gives you a different perspective and actually connects people in many ways. At the last part here, or the paragraph, understanding different types of storytelling will help you create a compelling and resonant visuals that enhance narrative clarity and emotional impact in your work, as well as provide you with a unique capability that sets you apart from others. Let's go into the next part, the second part on types of storytelling here, where we're going to go more into discussing storytelling tropes. And of course, this is probably something that you guys, in terms of usage, you'll use more than the previous one. The previous one was more like an overview on storytelling and what types of storytelling are out there. Now let's go into the tropes. Storytelling tropes are common themes or patterns in narrative that writers use to create recognizable elements, evoke emotions, or shape the plot. They are repeated ideas or conventions that audiences often encounter in stories, helping to guide expectations and add depth to the narrative experience. And of course, here we have different types of tropes. The hero's journey is basically a general trope. It has multiple components around it, but it's a general trope. The chosen one, you got Matrix, for example. He is the chosen one, right? Rags to riches, you have a lot of tales from The Lady and Vagabond, for example. It's rags to riches story from Disney. The love triangle, you get that in I don't come up with a movie right now, but there are movies that have that. The mentor is a trope. The anti-hero, the quest, the betrayal, the underworld, the redemption arc, and of course, if you guys watched, for example, The Walking Dead, Negan, which has like this baseball bat Lucille and does some horrible things, has a redemption arc in the entire series, and you find that in Games of Thrones as well. So there are these tropes that exist. You have the trickster, the damsel in distress, forbidden love, coming of age, the apocalypse, doppelganger, the MacGuffin, the femme fatale, or like the fatal female, the last stand, and the found family. Okay, and of course, all these tropes for you as artists, I think they're super important, because like anything that you'd want to draw or paint, or anything that you want to sketch around, you might think of a trope that you want to kind of enlist there. Or if you do something, let's say from, you go on a whim, you might then want to actually adjust it to a trope to actually give more sense to it. And I believe that it's actually doable and actually important. Now, we're going to go through some other parts relating to storytelling tropes. So here we have recognizability, okay, where tropes provide familiar patterns and themes that audience can easily recognize and connect with. You have expectations. They help shape audience expectations, guiding them through the narrative and creating anticipation. You have efficiency. Tropes serve as an efficient storytelling shortcuts, quickly establish character types, plot points, and themes. And this is important because, like in a project, if you work on animation, you'll have certain scenes to convey, and they're based on these tropes. You have versatility, where they can be used creatively to subvert expectations or add depth to familiar story elements. And of course, cultural understanding. Tropes reflect and reinforce cultural norms, values, and shared experience, facilitating communication and resonance across diverse audiences. And here I have an image that I just put an example. It's an example of a trope, goes in the era of the mentor or the quest. So we can associate this image either with the mentor or the quest. I know people enjoyed it. And the thing is this, it can be interpreted in a couple of ways, but the message is clear. A mage gives the book to another mage, one is shorter and looks to be part of a different class of mages. They also seem to meet in a secret spot, okay? Because it's in the middle of nowhere, it's in nature somewhere, at a tree, is their meeting spot, okay? So this is an example of depicting a trope. Now let's go to the next set here, where we're gonna talk about the monomyth. So the monomyth, or the hero's journey, as it's identified by Joseph Campbell, is a storytelling framework prevalent in myths and legends globally. It follows a hero who ventures into an adventure, confronts trials, undergoes transformation, and returns home or accomplishes a goal, gaining new insight or abilities along the way. And this is important to understand. That's what the monomyth represents. All right. And of course, here we gotta go through some pros and cons. Of course, you'll see the diagram on the right, and you'll see like how the entire process, goes from the ordinary world to call to adventure, refusal, and it goes like entire like set, return to the return with the elixir, and then back to the ordinary world. Okay, so this entire journey that the hero goes through is basically a transformational journey that helps our hero to become what it is, the hero. And of course, the pros and cons go as follows. When it comes to pros, it has a universal appeal, it has clear structures, it has emotional engagement, character development, and is very inspirational because a lot of people can relate to it. It has a very high percentage of relatability because every individual is on their own hero's journey. Of course, when it comes to cons, of course, you got predictability, you have limited flexibility, you have cultural bias depending on the culture that the hero's journey is into. Complexity, you have risk of cliches, meaning that some things can become cliche or repetitive in that sense, and that's not something that you probably want, but sometimes it can occur. Here we have a simple example scenario which relates to the meeting the mentor. Somewhere deep inside the forest around roots, such as a secret place, it also gives room for interpretation. And this is an important part that I want to add. Like a lot of the things that you might do as artists, you want them to have a high, let's say, interpretability level. You want to make sure that your piece is like descriptive enough, but it has like room for interpretation enough that it can be interpreted by people so they can actually work out their own world or their own fantasy in that sense. And that is probably super important. Or who is the student and the mentor, for example, in terms of interpretation? Like, we don't know exactly. It might be the fox, might be the mentor. The other fellow that is standing near the fox might be the student, and so on and so forth, or the other way around. Like, the fox is something that is transformative. It's maybe like a student on a test. He's becoming the fox to actually learn magic. Who knows? But again, it gives room for interpretation. Now, let's go to another type of storytelling, which is the mountain. The mountain storytelling type is a narrative structure where the plot steadily builds through a series of escalating events and conflicts, each more intense than the last, leading to a climactic peak and then a resolution. It visually resembles a mountain with a rising action, a climax, and a descending action, maintaining the audience's engagement through the continuous sense of progression and anticipation. What we have to understand here, of course, we have another diagram that is slightly different, and of course we got some pros and cons when it comes to the mountain. And of course, like, this diagram is way simpler. You have a background. This will include the introduction of the characters and setting. It starts going up the mountain. You have the rising action. Then it actually builds up and goes to the climax. This is where the problem will reach the highest point. You have the falling action. This section represents the moment when the characters work starts to resolve the problem or the conflict, and of course you get to the resolution. Here's we see how things end up in the story, and that's pretty much like the general idea of the mountain and how it does and how it actually performs in general. And what you guys can take out from here is basically this diagram. You can think about it. Okay, if I'm doing something, if I'm building some artworks, or if I'm building a narrative, I might want to build it this way. When it comes to pros and cons for the mountain, you have in terms of pros, you have a steady build-up, a climactic peak, clear progression, pacing control, which you can do, and it's very versatile, meaning like you can do switches and changes. You can have a slow burner, for example, if you want to, and then jump, a bit higher because stuff is happening, and then go even higher towards the climax and actually keep the audience engaged for like 20 minutes straight until it reaches the climax, and then you have the falling action, for example. And of course, when it comes to cons, it has a predictable structure. It has a risk of plateau. It has less character focus, potential for overwhelming the audience, and of course, resolution drop. And of course, when it comes to resolution drop, it's a con because the resolution itself, sometimes it's unsatisfactory to certain audiences. And here I have, for example, a sort of resolution of the conflict. It depicts a man in a pond who was killed, and petals falling down that his spirit is departing to another realm. So this is like the ending story that I have there depicted. Again, when I painted this, I was thinking about storytelling tropes mainly, but I found it a good explanation to put it in the resolution section here. As an artist, you can use any area of the mountain to build something cool. You can think about the theme to have an outcome that you would want to emphasize and connect with an audience. And this is actually pretty much when it comes to the mountain. Now let's go into the nested loops part. And here we got two parts on the nested loops, simply because it's probably something that you guys are not familiar with. And nested loops storytelling is a narrative technique where multiple stories are layered within one another, with each story providing context, depth, or backstory to the main narrative. This structure allows for complex and rich exploration of themes, characters, or events, as each nested story interweaves with and enhances the overall message. And of course, here you'll have certain type of series that will have nested loops, and of course the story will have this type of opening story, and then supporting story, key story, and then central idea. And of course, there's a conceptualization of the story, there's an experience of the supporting story, there's the experience of the key story, and when the actual phenomenon at the central idea and why it happened. And here we have some example of how you can actually paste stuff. And we have someone telling a story, wise person telling the story, the actual story becoming unveiled, final lesson as a metaphor. Okay, so for example, if you guys know Made in Abyss, it does have this type of structure in terms of storytelling. It's actually beautiful. I actually read. It's actually pretty grim too in many aspects. But it has this type of example where you'll see how the story starts and how it actually goes. It goes more and more to the central idea of the entire thing. And when it comes to pros and cons, we have depth and complexity, you have engagement, you have surprise and revelation, you have character insight and narrative flexibility. Cons, you have complexity, pacing issues, focus dilution, demanding for audience, and resolution challenges, which can actually be a thing. Now here's an example of nested loops that I actually did. And of course, here is a very simple example. So I did this for an ArtStation challenge a while back, and it starts with this area in the forest where our priest found the night blooms and the midnight is close, and they pick up the flowers and the year spirit prayer, and then an event, and then it's happening. They're gonna go to the shrine of Katka, whatnot. And in this shrine here where they actually there's the entire story of it. Then that's why they actually have those spirits. That's why they use those petals, because they're doing this type of offering for the spirits. And you see how things change and how it actually resolutes in the end. And again, this is purely for the purpose of example here, guys. You can do whatever you think is fit, but I wanted to give this example so you guys can check it out. Now let's go to some to do and not do when it comes to storytelling, or do's and don'ts. When it comes to storytelling, is extremely powerful from various ways of doing it, how everything is put to play. Humanity and civilizations were all built on storytelling. Steve Jobs said the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller, therefore we have to tell stories so we can shape the world and the humans that inhabit to make the world a better place. Now, let's go into the do's for storytelling, and then we'll go into the don'ts. When it comes to do's, we have research and plan your artwork thoroughly. Meaning that if you're a planning type, you can research and plan. If not, if you're more creative type, try to create first, and then you can actually go into like the planning phase after you create something. That's mainly the case, at least my recommendation, because like sometimes you can plan things and you work easier with a plan, and there are people like that, and some people that are working harder with a plan and they try to go on a whim more, and then they can plan on top of the whim, or like the intuition that that I call the whim. Establish a mood and atmosphere effectively. Make sure that you try to convey things very clearly. You want to focus on storytelling elements like gestures and symbolism, and you'll notice that even in these thumbnails that you see at the bottom here, the silhouettes are trying to convey something really clear. Create dynamic composition, engage viewers, leave room for the viewer interpretation, and of course, like most of these things can actually leave interpretation for the viewer in that sense. And some don'ts for storytelling: don't overload your artwork with unnecessary details. Neglecting character development, neglect character development and consistency, like those things are a no-go. Sacrifice coherence for complexity. So you don't want to create extra complexity layers, simply because I do believe that extra layers of complexity can actually make things more complicated, and obviously not more in serving your story and actually going against it, because you get into a lot of details that are not necessarily required. And you want to keep things simple so you can actually showcase things in a very clear manner. Ignoring established visual storytelling conventions, so that's a no-go as well. Rushing the process, it's a no-go. Usually take the time to refine your work. So in this whole thing with do's and don'ts, these are some very simple ways to actually think about storytelling and actually what you can use practically. Now, how can you get better at storytelling from a visual standpoint? So here are some 3 points that you can actually take note of in a book somewhere, in a notebook, wherever you want to take the notes. You want to read, take notes, and do follow-ups with what you read. So if you're reading stories, or like from short stories to medium or storytelling types or anything like that, take notes on them. Put it in your sketchbook. Like if you sketch something, take notes on stories, on the things that you sketch. You want to build little stories in written form to get an understanding of how stories are told. Maybe that's something you can try to do, and try to be as effective as possible. Like try to do a couple of sentences to tell a story. Like don't go overboard with it, writing like an entire book if that is the case. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be a visual storyteller and not a writer. Do practice thumbnailing and telling stories through thumbnails. And here, as you can probably notice at the bottom, again, you can practice storytelling through thumbnails. And through thumbnails, you can actually do a lot in a very short amount of time, meaning that it's not very demanding in terms of time frame. And you can do a lot of these thumbnails to explore storytelling. I do have a lot of these in terms of practicing. I practice this type of stuff all the time. It's one of the main things that I do in terms of practice in general. And I think it's unbelievably useful because it helps you with composition, telling stories, and being accurate with what you're trying to say there through very simple forms and simple shapes. And that actually makes it incredibly powerful. Now let's go into some visual examples from various people and see like what type of examples we have here. So here we have some very simple examples. They'll have the link there at the bottom as well. This is from Claude Z. I really like this artist simply because it has like a lot of messaging being conveyed. It's a lot of journey stuff going on, and there's a lot of depiction of like the world he's trying to build. And I think he has a series on this that is absolutely beautiful. I do recommend you guys check it out because I believe it's really cool. And of course, these leave room, at least for me, to interpret them the way I want. And it can be like interpreted in various ways. It can be like a fellow hero that is trying to get through a location. As people are discovering the city, it's either like there's the one at the bottom left, for example, is like, hey, there's this lord on its journey, and has like a bunch of people with him, and he's looking, and he has a servant and as well, and so on and so forth. Like they're very interesting stories being depicted. In this example, I think this is absolutely beautiful. I really like Gabriel Gomez's work, and I think it's very on point and it's very good. When it comes to color, it's absolutely amazing, and when it comes to conveying a message or a story, it's absolutely amazing as well. He actually has the beautiful ability to capture a moment in time that it's unique for that moment in itself. And I believe these are some examples that are actually go into animation and really strong compositions and really easy messaging and understanding of what he's trying to do. I do recommend you guys check Gabriel Gomez's work because it's absolutely amazing. And the last example here, we have Kevin Lemonnier. Hopefully I pronounced his name well. This is I believe he's a French artist, and he did stuff for Riot Games. And of course we have like Klaus as well. And you'll actually notice that Kevin actually is really good at creating stories just through buildings and actually building sets as well. And this actually gives him an incredible strength and power to actually make things really, really cool. So I want to thank you all for taking your time and listening to me rambling about storytelling. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Check our video description for more resources, including courses, tips, feedback, and a lively community on Discord. I'll see you there.